Hi everyone, welcome to Videos to Learn. This is part 2 of the Angular Services Complete tutorial session. In this particular session, we will be providing an introduction to services. Okay, so this is the part that we are actually going to see in this particular session. And this introductory session is divided into two phases. The first one is the theory phase and the second one is the hands-on session. And in the theory phase, actually we will be seeing what is a service, why services are required in Angular, those part, and that is included in this particular video. And for the hands-on session, we will be having another video which provides how a service can be created, how a service will be consumed in the components, right? So all those things will be dealt in the hands-on session. So let's start the theory part of our introductory session to services. So what is a service? As per Angular.io, service is a class or a simple class with a narrow, well-defined purpose. Right? In Angular, whether it is a service, whether it is a component, whether it is a directive, whether it is a pipe, so every thing is having a well-defined purpose. So similarly, service is also having a well-defined purpose, and the purpose is to provide services to a component, directive, or to another service. What I mean by providing services is it fetches data from the backend, it runs a common business logic, and we can then reuse the service at many places across the application. But why exactly is service required? Because we already have a component which itself is a class, and we can actually write the logic of fetching data from the backend and running the business logic within the component. Then why to create a service and to create another extra burden and maintaining, right? So why the component itself is not able to handle all those things? But for a simple application where only one or two components are there, and if you want to do the fetching the data from the backend, it is fine. But for a real-time application where there are like 20 to 30 components and each component is fetching data from the backend, it's a clumsy design pattern that you are actually building the application, right? So a component is having a purpose. What is the purpose of a component? To present to the user. So write the presentation logic, and its component is intended to provide the presentation logic to the user. So if it is designed in such a way that it has to do multitasking like presentation, it has to handle the presentation logic, and it has also need to connect to the database and fetch the data and then manipulate that data. So it will be like a multitasking multitasking design that you are actually giving to a component, which itself breaks the single responsibility principle, right? We are actually having a solid principle in that D stands for do not repeat yourself. So that itself is broken with this multitasking design which is given to a component. So for making the component design in such a way that it is only used for the presentation logic, then this fetching the data has to be given to some other classes, right? And that class is called a service, which actually interacts with the database and fetches the data, and this data is provided to a component, right? So that is why we require services in our application, and this same data might be required to be used in other components as well. So in that case, actually we can use this reuse this service, and because of the use of dependency injection pattern design pattern, we will be actually creating only one instance of the service in an application. So whether it is used in 5 or 10 or 15 components, it doesn't matter. The instance that it gets created is only once. So it is a singleton service. And in other areas where it is being consumed, it is actually injected through the dependency injection pattern. So that is what a service is all about. Now let's see an application where service is not used and how the application would behave, right? So we have an user who is actually hitting our application URL in the browser. As soon as the user hits the application URL, our component and database and fetching the data and everything starts. So we have like in our application we have two component A and component B, and we have a database where we need to fetch the data from the database, and we have to do some presentation logic based on that particular data. So in this case actually we are not having a service. So what happens is like component A and component B, it interacts with the database to fetch the data, and component receives the data from the database, and it based on the data it will be handling a presentation logic. So currently the component has done two tasks. One is the fetching the data from the database, and it also is handling the presentation logic. And it does based on the presentation logic, the template will be updated, like the data binding and everything is updated in the template, and it is ready for the view, and the user is presented with the view, and the user is able to view the result. So what happens with this particular design? So it is very inefficient. So right now we are not able to see that because we are only having two components, but in a real-time application it will be like 15 to 20 components, and if each component is interacting with the database, we can say that it is a purely inefficient design, right? And it also results in low performance because it waits for the data that needs to be received from the database, and then works upon the presentation logic, then it gets presented to the user, right? So it is a very low performance design, and as it is doing multitasking, right, it is breaking the single responsibility principles, right? And how this can be resolved is by using services. So what service does is, we will be seeing the same scenario. User interacts with the browser and it's the application URL, and we have two components, component A and component B, and there is a database setup. But component will not be interacting with the database directly. So service interacts with the database and fetches the data. So the data is available with the service, and both the component A and component B gets the data from the service through the dependency injection pattern. We will be actually injecting the service in the two components, and we will be the two components will be provided with the data, and the component's duty is just to handle the presentation logic, right, based on the data, and the template is ready with the bindings and everything is completed, and the user will be presented with the data. So here actually we have bypassed the interaction with the database from the component. So this is highly efficient, and the performance is improved because the each module, like if it is a component, if it is a service, so they are actually allocated with a well defined purpose, and hence the performance is improved, and also it takes care of the single responsibility principle, right, where each class, like if it is a service, if it is a component, so each is provided with a single responsibility, and it enhances the performance by a lot, right? So this is the practical use case of a service, okay, how the service is behaving. So that's it for today's session. In the next session we will be seeing how we can actually create a service and how a service can be consumed in a component. So all those things, details will be discussed in the next session. Thanks a lot for watching. Stay tuned.